Shalom. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. One of the great questions facing humanity has always been this: is the Bible true? How can anyone know? Well, on this day in 1948, according to the Hebrew calendar, something happened in history which answers that question quite irrefutably. After nearly 2,000 years of exile, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, to be known as the State of Israel, Medinat Yisrael. Well, it was written previously all over the pages of the Bible. It would take me all night to sit here and even read the half of them. Here's a few quickies just from the prophet Ezekiel 36:24. For I will take you from the nations and gather you out of all the countries and bring you back to your own land. In another verse, Ezekiel says, in the day that I pronounce you clean from all of your iniquities, I will cause the cities to be inhabited and the ruins to be rebuilt. The land that was desolate will be tilled instead of being a wasteland in the sight of all that pass by. This is exactly what happened when the Jewish people poured in to the land of Israel in the 20th century. The early Chalutzim, or pioneers, came in the early 20th century. They were considered just a bunch of crazy people, really. But then after the Holocaust, when there was nowhere else to go, the Jews, what was left of us in Europe, came pouring into the land. And from all the other nations, Jewish people came pouring into the land to do exactly what it said here would happen, to cause the cities to be inhabited and the ruins to be rebuilt. It goes on, the land that was desolate will be tilled instead of being a wasteland, and they will say, this land that was a wasteland has become like the Garden of Eden. The waste, desolate, and ruined cities are fortified and inhabited. Then the nations that are left all around you will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt the ruined places and replanted what was desolate. So God said long ago that he would not only bring the Jewish people back to the land to rebuild the cities and the waste places of old, which we've seen happen in our time, but moreover that this would serve as a testimony that God would verify his own word through this historical event that he would do with the Jewish people. This is the reality of Yom HaAtzmaut and what it means for you, me, and for the whole world. There's more that Ezekiel the prophet says. Again, this is just one prophet, a few verses. This is from Ezekiel 37, verse 21. Behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. Now, somebody might, when you read passages of the Bible, somebody who, isn't into that might just say, what a bunch of hooey. But I'm sorry, you really can't do that with these prophetic verses concerning the return of the Jewish people to the land and the rebuilding of the state of Israel, because what was written about, in this case, 2,500 years ago, has actually happened in our time. There's no arguing with it. It's irrefutable. Ezekiel also says, I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be king to them all. They will no longer be two nations and never again be divided, and so forth. And then he starts to talk about my servant David will be king over them, and they will have one shepherd. There's a lot there that Ezekiel goes on about my servant David. My servant David will be their prince forever. And now David, of course, is the forebearer of the Messiah, in the sense that the Messiah, according to the Bible, comes from the family of David, being the Son of God born into the family of David. And see, this too has happened contemporaneously with the rebirth of the Jewish state. We have the spiritual rebirth of the Jewish people. So just as Jews have returned to the land to rebuild the waste places and the cities of old, just as was prophesied by Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and other prophets, so too the Jewish people are returning to faith in the Son of David as Messiah. And I say returning because we were the first people to believe that Yeshua was the Son of David and the Son of God. The Jewish people took that belief to the world. We took it to the nations. Thousands and thousands of Jews that we don't know what they were called back in the day, but today they call us Messianic Jews, that talk a lot about not only how Yeshua is the Messiah and the promised Son of God, Son of David, but also that the sign that his end time return is near is the rebirth of the Jewish state. So whether you consider the Bible as the Tanakh or Brit Chadashah, which is the Old or the New Testament, in either part of it, it speaks over and over, repeatedly and throughout, of events that are happening today. Specifically, it records a time that will come, a time called the Acharit HaYamim, which means the end days or end times, which is a time in human history when the Jewish people, after a long period of exile, would return to our ancient homeland to rebuild the cities and the ruins of long ago and establish Israel again as a mighty nation among the nations of the world, and also to set the stage to prepare the way for return of Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, the anointed one, the son of David. All of this is recorded in the Bible 2,000 or 2,500 years, or even as long as 3,000 years ago, if you look to the Torah, because it's there in the Torah as well. Someone says, "Oh, well, where's the Torah?" Well, read Deuteronomy 30, for example. I don't have time to sit here and prattle on about all these scriptures, but it's the restoration of Israel is such a recurrent theme in the Bible that it can be no coincidence that these things that were recorded 3,000 and 2,000 years ago are happening in our time. But it is no coincidence, it's not luck, but it proves the veracity of the ancient Hebrew scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament. How could it otherwise have been testified to in such detail? Keep in mind that the physical rebirth of the state of Israel that's happening in our time, right here in the modern era, that's being celebrated today in the land of Israel, as well as in other parts of the world, because today is Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. And the reality of Jewish statehood, the rebirth of the Jewish state, the return of Jews to the land of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is an absolute impossibility. It's something that can't be, and yet somehow it is. It never could have happened, but somehow it did. Such things never happen. Who ever heard of an ancient people returning to their homeland, let alone 2,000 years later, let alone the most persecuted people on the face of the earth, which culminated in an attempted genocide in Europe? As a people, we were in exile 2,000 years. We were persecuted. We were cast out. cast to and fro, plotted against, tortured, deprived of property and basic human rights, and ultimately stuffed into boxcars and deported from our homes to death camps where there was a concerted effort to systematically exterminate us from the face of the earth. Who ever heard of even one people returning to its ancient homeland, let alone a people like that? And yet it has happened. Yom HaAtzmaut celebrates this event, particularly in the land of Israel, but it's being celebrated everywhere. And the fact that Jews are celebrating statehood, the fact that Gentile Christian believers worldwide are also celebrating this event. And I'll explain that too, because now the nations of the world are getting in on the joy and the celebration and the meaning of it, because it means something for the whole world. The fact is that it's a miracle which only God could bring about. Moreover, it's written about thousands of years in advance. It's a testimony, irrefutable, undeniable, inarguable, proof positive that the words of the Bible are true, not just in respect to the end time return of the Jews to the land and the rebirth of the Jewish state, all of which is repeatedly and throughout written about in the scriptures, but it proves the veracity of everything else. If anyone wants to argue the veracity of the Bible, I will point and say one word: Israel. You can't argue with that. Jewish national rebirth is the marvel of the Gentile world as well. The Christian world had previously largely dismissed the idea of Jewish statehood as a lost hope for centuries and centuries, seeing the Jews in exile trying to survive in the lands and the nations of others. It was largely dismissed by traditional, non-biblically based Christianity, largely centered in Europe. But now that it's happened, it's brought great hope and joy to many in the Gentile Christian world. And that's a blessing to Jewish people. It blesses us, and it gives us nachas, it gives us joy, it gives us happiness to know that there are so many non-Jews in the world paying attention to what God is doing with the Jews and with Israel. And not only paying attention, but who love us and want to bless us and want to see us individually blessed, and blessed as a people, and also blessed as a nation. And I guarantee you this: the nation that blesses Israel will be blessed. Rest assured of that. And I'm thankful that the United States, to some extent, has always operated by that principle. But in this day, in this particular day and age, we have the friendliest administration ever in the White House concerning Israel. And this is not a political ad, and whatever you think about all that, it's your business, it's your right, and I respect that. But you cannot deny that this is the friendliest president that Israel has ever had, and Jewish people in Israel know it too. That's why the embassy, the American embassy, is finally in Jerusalem. Many others ignored it, others promised it, didn't do it, but now it's happened. Today, millions of Christians, particularly in the United States, but in other nations as well, see the Jewish state as the most exciting biblical development since the day of Yeshua and the apostles, because it proves the veracity of the Bible. For many centuries, the Christian world largely dismissed it, as I said. But in the 20th century, that changed dramatically following the rebirth of the Jewish state, because what it said was going to happen happened, and all you can do is say, oh, well, it said it was going to happen, now it's happened. So there's no point trying to dismiss it anymore. Some do. There are certainly those in the Christian world who support BDS measures to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, to try to pressure the Jewish state into giving away its lands, negotiating with terrorists, and all that phony baloney. But thankfully today, millions of evangelicals see the Jewish state as the reality of what is written about at length in the scriptures, and because they see it, they also see a responsibility to stand with Israel. And they see this idea, this crazy, crazy idea, that those who bless Israel will be blessed. Well, God spoke it to our father Abraham long ago when he told him, those who bless you, he said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Those who condemn Israel are condemned, and those who bless Israel are blessed. And millions of people, non-Jewish people in the world today, believe that. And it's because what the scripture said would happen has happened. But there's more. There's another condition or two, also spoken of plainly in the pages of the Bible, pertaining to the rebirth of the Jewish state. One, the rebirth of the Jewish state is a signal flag to the world that says the return of Messiah to Jerusalem is near. And so that's very exciting too, because people who read the Bible see, oh, that's the sign. The fig tree has blossomed. Now you know the time is near. Messiah is coming back to Jerusalem soon. But secondly, not only the rebirth of the Jewish state testifies that Messiah is coming home soon, but there's another thing that's really very much bound up together with the rebirth of the Jewish state, the physical rebirth of the Jewish people. The other thing is the spiritual rebirth. When Yeshua's own people recognize him as Mashiach, ben David, the anointed one, the son of David, then at last he will return to Jerusalem, the city of God, and the capital of planet Earth. So it is many Jews like me and tens of thousands of others throughout the world and in Israel today recognize Yeshua, or Jesus, as the Messiah. Where do we get this idea? From the Bible, the pages of the Bible, Tanakh and Brit HaChadashah, Old Testament and New Testament. It's there, plain to see throughout. More often than not, when a Jewish person comes to believe that Yeshua must be the Messiah, this knowledge begins to take shape and form when we read the Bible. Very few Jewish people today ever read the Bible. Most have little idea what's even written there. Personally, I went to Hebrew school from age 7 through 13. I learned all about custom, tradition, language, liturgical prayer. Never did we read the Bible. This is typical. As Jews, we are one of the most well-read, one of the most well-educated, one of the most intellectual people in the world. We're known for that. And yet, when it comes to the one book that has influenced human affairs by far more than any other, we've scarcely read it. As I said, Jews today typically do not read the Bible. Just as it was typical for non-Jews in the traditional historical church in Europe also to not read the Bible. Priests and bishops and church leaders were the experts, so to speak, on the Bible, but the general people never read them. And if they did, they bought into the idea of dismissing Israel's national rebirth. It was never going to happen, even though it was testified there throughout the pages of the scriptures. It was equally typical during that time for Jewish people to dismiss the idea of Yeshua as the Messiah. So as the Christian world dismissed Israel, the Jewish world dismissed Yeshua. So there's this parallel there happening in our time, because now it's all changing. The Christian world doesn't, because it can't dismiss Israel's national revival. It's happened. There's still some that try to dismiss it, but it's pretty hard to do when it's already happened. It's like trying to say the sky's not blue when you look at it and go, oh, there it is, it's blue. And there's this parallel, as now, today, the Christian world is embracing the reality of the biblical physical restoration of the nation of Israel. So too, there are those within the Jewish world that are embracing the reality of Yeshua, ben David, Yeshua, the son of David, Yeshua, ben Elohim, Yeshua, the son of God, Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua, the Messiah. We're living in the day of the physical and also spiritual restoration. The two are intertwined like strands of DNA, happening contemporaneously on the scene of human history. This is not some far out thing that's supposed to happen in the future in heaven somewhere. No, this is supposed to happen and is happening right here on the human scene in the history of human affairs, and we're seeing it with our own eyes. Jewish people today, both in the land and in the diaspora, are put off with the old religion. Spiritual revival among the Jews is happening today, but not through the Judaism of the old country and of the exile. This isn't meant to criticize or hurt anyone's feelings. It's a very sensitive thing to talk about religions and why they don't work and that sort of thing. And I'm sorry for that. But through the Judaism of the Bible, from Abraham and the patriarchs, Moses, to the apostles of Yeshua, right up to today, Messianic Judaism has been born on the scene of human history in the modern age. It's been born through that Judaism of the Bible, not through the Judaism of the rabbis, of the Talmud, of the Mishnah, Gemara, and of Rashi and Maimonides and all that. Nothing against that. That is not biblical end time revival and restoration spiritually of the Jewish people. Where do you find it? You find it in this here book right here, the scriptures, the Tanakh and the Brit HaChadashah. Yeshua is the Messiah. He's written about by Moses. He's written about by the prophets. He will return to planet Earth when the Jews return to the land and build the waste places and the cities of old. Where am I getting that from? From the scriptures. And it's happening. 100 years ago, someone would say, oh, that's never going to happen. Well, guess what? It has. Messianic Jews see not only Yeshua as the Mashiach or Messiah, but we also see our Gentile friends as our brothers and sisters in the Lord. This is so key because we're in a common bond of fellowship with all those from among the nations through our mutual faith in the biblical Jewish Messiah, not the Messiah of Rabbinic Judaism, but not the Messiah of historical, non-biblical Christianity either. I'll just read one more scripture tonight. Jeremiah 30, verse 6 through 10. Listen to this. Ask and see, can a man bear children? That's a crazy question, isn't it? Then Jeremiah goes on describing a vision that he had. Why do I see every strong man with his hands on his stomach like a woman in labor, every face turned deathly pale. What was this vision? He saw every man bent over, doubled over in pain like a woman in travail. It was the Holocaust. He saw it 2,500 years in advance. He goes on and he calls that time the time of Jacob's trouble, because there was never anything like it. He says how awful that day will be. No other will be like it. It will be a time of Jacob's trouble. But listen to this part. Here's the good part. But he will be saved out of it. You see, the people of Israel were saved out of the Holocaust. And as crazy as it may seem, it was because of the Holocaust that the dream of the Jewish state that was depicted in the pages of the Bible that could never happen, but it had to happen, it was because of the Holocaust that it was made possible. Because after that, people, leaders of nations, many Christian nations, not all of them, but many that were, began to see we need to give the Jews a homeland. They began to see the need for it. And so it came to pass. Just as Jeremiah said, it will be the time of Jacob's trouble, but he will be saved out of it. And in that day, the Lord Almighty declares, I'm reading on verse 8, Jeremiah 30, I will break the yoke off their necks and will tear off their bonds. No longer will foreigners enslave them. See, when you've got your own nation, then the yoke is broken. You're not slaves or servants of another nation. You're not borrowing, you're not tenants in their land. You don't have to go to the king of Russia anymore and say, excuse me, Mr. Czar, is it okay if we, hang around in this crappy land over here that nobody else really has anything to do with? So can we, and we don't have to do that anymore. Because we have our own nation. And it's a mighty one. And the cities are rebuilt. And the waste places and the ruins of old are rebuilt. And there's a strong military and a strong economy. And I could go on, but we'd be here all night to talk about all the successes of a tiny little Jewish state that's only been there a little more than 70 years, 72 years. But has come on the scene like a meteor out of the sky, and is the marvel of the nations of the world. Jeremiah goes on and says this, instead of serving the foreigners, he says, instead they will serve the Lord their God and David their king, you see, whom I will raise up for them. That's, again, the reference to Mashiach, ben David, Messiah King. So it's always the spiritual revival is bound up together with the physical revival. They're happening contemporaneously. Last verse, so don't be afraid, Jacob, my servant. Don't be dismayed, Israel, declares the Lord. I will surely save you out of a distant place, your descendants from the land of their exile. Jacob will again have peace and security, and no one will make him afraid. For I am with you and will save you, declares the Lord. So on this Yom HaAtzmaut, I pray that you have seen, through the miracle of the rebirth of the Jewish state, the truth of what is written in God's book, the Bible. And if not yet, I hope you will see it soon. For Israel is a light unto the nations, and the King of Israel, the Son of David, is the light of the world. Thank you for joining me tonight. God bless you. Shalom.